Hello, I'm Justin from I Know the Guy Bikes. If you bought a bike from me or from somebody else online and I had it shipped to you, you will probably need to do these 5 things to make sure it's assembled correctly and it's safe to ride. In any case that you need to have a double check by a bike shop, most bike shops will do a safety check for free to make sure the torque tensions are correct and everything is safe on the bike, if you feel like you need to have that done. When assembling a bike, you basically will need a pedal wrench or a 15mm wrench. Sometimes a adjustable wrench will work. This is fiber grip, or you can use actually bike grease for some parts to assembly. And an Allen wrench, or an Allen that's a 5, a 4, and maybe a 6, depending on what kind of bike it is. 5 main steps. Number 1, you'll need to install a seat post. Number 2, put the front brake on. Number 3, put the front wheel on with the quick release skewer. And number 4, the handlebars. So going with those 5 steps, you should be able to assemble your bike after you have packed it. Once you received your bike, you want to inspect the bike box to make sure there's no holes or damages to the bike. And you'll usually have the bike itself wrapped up, as well as a seat and seat post is one other item, as well as another parts box that usually will have your pedals and your quick release in there. Let's go ahead and dive in. So when you get your bike and it's all taped up, you don't want to open up the bike box by just cutting right down the middle of it, because tires and so forth parts might be pretty close to the sides. This will have tape all over it, so when you cut it on the side of it, not cut into the box. So when you're cutting the tape, cut the tape lengthwise, and if it's glued or whatever, you should be able to pop it open, like so. And the bike will be compacted like a little jigsaw puzzle piece, like so. What you're looking for is the frame and the wheel, parts box, and the seat and seat post. If is there any damage to the side of the box, like holes and so forth, those may have fallen out. That's when you would have to do a clean. 99% of the time the bikes get there pretty intact. So that's what you're looking for when you open it up. And hopefully it's in there pretty snug, so it hasn't been loosened around, rubbing up against parts. But that's pretty much your bike in the box. Now let's pull it out. Once you have pulled the bike out of the box, you should have a frame with the shifters and bars, a wheel. You should be able to find a box of parts with the pedals and the skewer, and the seat post. Those are the things you're looking for when you open up the bike. We want to start with the seat post. Starting with the seat post, most bikes you'll have to put a light lube on here, but since this is carbon on carbon, you want to leave it dry, or you can use a product called Fiber Grip from Finish Line, and we're going to put a little bit of dab onto the actual seat post itself. What this will do is prevent any liquids, sweat to go down in the seat post. Even though carbon is not corrosive, it's good to have a pre-treat between both the seat post and the frame. You will need a 5mm for this particular bike. Some bikes will vary in different Allen wrenches or bolts style. Most bikes are metric, so you want to keep that in mind. So you don't have to worry about seat height. We'll go over that at a later time in this video, but we just want to be able to get something in there so we can tighten it down, like so. If you have the luxury of putting in a repair stand, that's great. If not, you can still do this on the floor. You just want to make sure when it's everything unpacked, you want a soft area for the fork to sit on, like carpet or padded area. First, you're going to want to take these bolts off. Sometimes there's just 2, in this case there's 4. So you want to take all these Allen parts and try not to drop any of them or lose any of them, because once they're lost, you'll never be able to find it again. So when you're putting the bars back on. You want it flush on the backside and the shifter brake levers forward. You just want to hand tight one or two of them so it holds it in place. And don't force these just yet because you can cross thread the stem. Also, what you're looking for is clean lines for your cables. So you don't want these shifter cables twisted. You want it to be able to go to the right to the right side, the left to the left side, and the brake will funnel to either the left or the right, depending on what type of bike it is. So when you tighten these down snug, you want to kind of go evenly between all 4 or 2 bolts. Most handlebars will have an indication or a marker where center is, or adjustment lines. In this case, this is a Bontrager B logo. So you don't want these too tight, just lightly snug so the bar itself still can be moved. So we're going to rotate this that it's in the center of the window, or the graphics between the two is equal on both sides. So that's where you want to get the bar centered. Now you want to go ahead and rotate the bar so it's level to the frame. So you got the top tube here and the bottom of the drop bar. You want those fairly level to start with. You can do minor adjustments after a couple rides. You can rotate it up or down, however you feel that's more comfortable for you. So you want to go ahead and tighten these up in a cross pattern. And these will be marked, most stems will be marked if you have a torque wrench for what torque it needs to be at. This one's 4.5, so I'm just going to hand tight these and follow up later with a torque wrench. But if you don't have a torque wrench, it's fine. Just a good snug so it's secure. The next step is to install the brake. The brake will be usually just floating here when you unpack it, or it might be completely disassembled altogether. I usually try to keep them together so you don't have to readjust the cable tensions and so forth. On the front brake, you'll notice there will be some washers. These washers are going to be more forward, or they will be forward. And then you'll have a lock nut that goes on the back side. I do snug these down so they don't get lost in shipping. So you want to loosen that up and take it off. Once you want to put this brake back into the front fork mount. So this might get twisted and turned in different areas where you want this cable to be on the outside of your shifter cable, so it fits like so. If you put it the other direction like this, your shifting or your braking might be manipulated while turning. So it's designed to be on the outside. So you'll notice your right shifter will loop through between the brake cable and the frame. Your front shifter will go to the left side of the bike. The front brake will wrap around. So once you have this all assembled, when you do turn back and forth, there's no binding between any of the cables and the housing. To tighten this down, you take this bolt part, and it's usually a hollow sleeve that goes on the back side of this. So on this bike, it is a carbon fork, but usually the inside inserts are made out of metal, so you don't have to worry about over torquing it. Obviously, you don't want to extremely make it tight, but you want to make sure it's tight enough that it doesn't shift. So I tighten it down so it's snug, and pretty much center of the particular brake. We will adjust this once the front wheel is installed. This is your typical skewer. It's basically a bolt that goes through the hub. This is the nut on this side here. You'll notice there's 2 springs. If it doesn't have springs, that's fine. The springs are actually just an aid to help the skewer center itself when the wheel's being put into the dropout. But you want to unscrew this out so it goes through the actual hub itself. Here you'll notice a little bit of a grease. If your skewer does not have any grease on it, you can use even Vaseline or just a light bearing grease is what we use in the shop. That just keeps it from corroding and so forth and makes it a little bit easier to take it in and out. So you have the hub itself. Well, first you want to identify which is the rotational direction of the wheel. On the left-hand side, that's where the skewer lever is going to be. So typically you'll find like a logoing by the valve itself. In this case, it's on both sides. Or there'll be a directional arrow on the actual tire itself. The hub's going to go. So you take the skewer. This is the direction it's going to go, like so. Skewer goes through the hub, and you take your nut and skewer spring. You notice that the skewer springs are tapered inwards. Reason being is when they compress down, they're out of the way when the skewer itself locks down. Now next to put it on the bike. So once you have the skewer in place, now it's time to put it on the bike. Skewers are typically mounted on the left side of the bike that will match the rear wheel. So once you have it set, you want to have this unscrewed a little bit so it actually surpasses the dropouts. The dropouts will actually have these safety catches. So the safety catches are designed so if the skewer does flip over while on riding, it doesn't completely drop out. It catches in there. That's why it's completely unscrewed when you put these on. So you want to go flush, hold it up tight. I typically like to hold the nut side down with my thumb as I'm tightening this down. So you don't want to tighten it all the way like this because that, yes, it's going to hold itself, but it's not the correct way of doing it. And it just typically might have a chance of loosening up while you're riding. How a skewer works is basically it's a leveraging system that when you adjust the nut side on this side over here, loosen and tighten it, it catches halfway. You want to get to about halfway mark and they'll have an open and a close. Some are marked, some are not. But basically the left lever goes upwards. I like to go parallel with the fork blade. That way I can get a little bit of leverage and tighten it down. So you want to make sure it's flush in both dropouts. If it's off one side or the other, just go ahead and release this. And make sure it's pulled up snug on both dropouts and tighten back down. Or you can put it on the floor so it has equal weight from gravity to tighten it up as well. You just want to make sure they are equally connected on both sides. That's how you get the wheel put in there. Once the wheel is in there, then you want to make sure your brake is adjusted according to the wheel. It may rub right off the bat. The brake itself has a lever, a quick release lever itself. This lever opens up the calipers so the wheel can drop in and out with the tire in place. When you tighten it back down, usually in a more downward angle, some brakes may be a little different, but they all have some type of similar of a quick release system. You want to tighten that down, and when you hit your brake, you want it to be equal on both sides. So you don't want to adjust this right off the bat. If you know this is center, you want to go ahead and adjust your brake itself. By doing so, some of these brakes will have a screw that you can adjust the tension, but typically what you want to do is just loosen the back of the brake that you just installed, compress the brake down tight, and tighten it back up. Typically that will self-adjust to center when you tighten it back down. And of course you want to make sure the wheel dropout is flush and the brakes are not rubbing and they are equally hitting the brake surface on both sides. And that's how you mount your wheel and your brakes. Now it's time to install your pedals. Once you have your pedals unpacked, you'll notice there's an R and an L. On all pedals, there is a right thread and a left thread or reverse thread on the left-hand side. So you want to identify these before you go to the bike and start trying to put it on. So the right foot obviously is for your right foot and the left. So what I like to do, and it usually is a good idea, if it doesn't come with a little bit of a grease on there, I would put some grease on there. That keeps it from seizing on there if you ever need to take those off at a later date. So let's go ahead and put these on. So now since you identify which is the right and left pedal, a 15 millimeter wrench or they'll also have an Allen wrench that goes on the inside. Most of them are the ones I sell have the wrench, but if the same concept is correct for both. So the easiest way to remember to put these on is, instead of like the right thread goes this direction and the left thread goes opposite, is when you pedal backwards, they tighten. So go ahead and put the right one on there and slowly engage it and pedal backwards. Then go ahead and grab your left pedal. Pedal that one back there too. Like so. And once they're finger tight, then go ahead and take either a 15mm wrench, or you have a pedal wrench, that's great. And like so. And just use a little bit of torque to tighten that down. Don't want to over tighten them so they're really hard to come off. And the reason why one's threaded the opposite direction as the other, as when you're pedaling, they are tightening. So they won't loosen up as you pedal forward. So now we have everything on the bike. Now we just need to make sure everything is shifting correctly and stopping correctly. So once you have those pedals on, this is the good time to actually start checking that shifting. So each gear you click needs to go up one gear. In this case, it looks a little bit of a slop in the cable housing. There's a barrel adjuster on the back of the rear derailleur, which you can unscrew that a quarter of a turn, which lengthens the housing, which makes it tighter, so it makes it help it engage. So that's one of those adjustments you can do to kind of fine tune that rear derailleur. So hit all those gears, each one of those. And the same thing for the front. This one has a triple, so you just want to make sure it goes through each one of those gears and make sure it's not throwing it off into the inside or the outside. Also understand. Keep in mind when you're actually riding and when it's under torque and tension, sometimes it will be thrown off a little bit. It'll act a little bit differently in a short way. So what happens on the stand sometimes does not completely reflect what's going on when you're actually going for your ride. But this looks pretty good, so it's about ready for your ride. So lastly, we want to double check the rear brake. It may have got ajar during shipping, but you should have the actual lever part going down, like the front, and when you hit the brake, it's supposed to be equal on both sides and hitting the rim and not the tire. If these brake pads are rubbing against the tire when it's spinning, it will burn the tire itself and you'll have a blowout. So you want to make sure they're equally even as the wheel goes around and it's perfectly true. Since now you have your bike all ready to ride and all together, probably want to do a couple of adjustments before you go on that ride. On the seat height, for a rough estimate, you can adjust the saddle height so as to about the top of your hip. That's a good eyeball just right out of the box to just do your initial adjustment. And go ahead and tighten that down. And also for your bars, since it's on the ground now, it's flush and center, and you want to make sure these are tight. Like so. So a couple things you want to do before your first ride. You want to do the ABCs. Number one, A is for air. These typical tires go up to about 100, 120 PSI. They'll be marked on the side of the tire like your car tires. You want to make sure they get up to at least 100 PSI, or about 90 to, it's personal preference, but 90 to 100 PSI, both front and rear. Second is brakes. As we went over, we want to make sure the brakes are equal, hitting the rim flush, and they're centered, so they're not causing any equal wear or rubbing. So both front and back. And the third and lastly was the chain, which we went through the drivetrain. Also, you may want to lube that. Typical lubing is pretty easy to do, and I'll make a video at a later date for that to show. But it should be lubed up right out of the box, ready to go for you. So your first test ride, you want to just take it around the block, make sure it's shifting all the gears, front and rear brakes are working equally, and your seat height is adjusted correctly. As another adjustment you want to keep in mind is when your pedal stroke is at on the straight bottom, you want about a 5-degree bend in your knee when you're doing the full pedal stroke. Adjustments you can do if you're finding yourself, if you're having comfort issues, is you can adjust the stem as the bars can rotate down or up. The length of the stem can't be adjusted, it would have to be switched out. The seat itself can be adjusted height-wise, as well as the seat can be shifted forward and aft, also tilted up and down. Sometimes these come out, they may not be flush. Typically at a pro shop they will put a level on here so it's flush to start off with. Then you can do those micro adjustments as you ride. Congratulations on your new to you and used bike, and I hope you have a good time riding.